My journey as an Umbraphile. I was, I'm a physician, amateur astronomer, and an Umbraphile. I've been a member of ASLE since 1985. What's the definition of Umbraphile? This was penned by Glenn Schneider, from the Latin umbra meaning shadow, from the Greek philo meaning love, hence lover of the shadow. In this case, the shadow of the moon, the umbra. I've seen a bunch of eclipses. 20 totals, 3 annulars, and 2 partials. This is my list of total eclipses. My first in 1991 in Baja, my most recent in 2019 in an airplane over the South Pacific. I will just dwell on this slide for a moment because I have a lot of slides. I got to get through it. So the longest one on land was the first one, 6 minutes and 54 seconds. The longest totality I've seen was from the air, which is in 2010, 9 minutes and 23 seconds, because if the geometry is correct and you fly along with the shadow, you can extend the length of totality essentially by the differential speed between the shadow and the airplane. So my total time basking in the umbra of the moon has been 69 minutes and 43 seconds. Nowhere near a record. There are a couple of people that I know of that are well over 2 hours. That's Craig Small and Glenn Schneider. Okay. My Umbraphilia, or eclipse chasing, evidently caught the attention of a production company in California that was making the TV series for the History Channel called The Universe. And they called me up and said, "We heard you do videos of solar eclipses. We'd like to see some of your footage." So I sent it to them. If you'll notice, the archival stills and footage provided by, and down at the bottom, Joel Moskowitz. I actually provided footage for 2 episodes. So do this enough and you get known. All right. I'm starting in 1992 because, unfortunately, all my slides and everything for 1991 and others in the 90s are in New York, and I'm in Florida. Pictured on the screen is, and I just blocked his name. Senior
Todd Hill. Todd Hill?
Roger Tuthill, right. Roger Tuthill arranged this trip. We chartered a DC-10, I believe, from Vaspi Airlines out of Rio de Janeiro and intercepted over the South Pacific. And that's Glenn Schneider making like a pirate. When we go to an eclipse, we patch one eye to dark adapt that eye so that we can, at least for a few seconds before we lose a dark adaptation, see a greater extent of the corona. And this was what we saw outside the airplane through the window. And there was an elderly Japanese gentleman on board who must have had tremendous eyesight, because immediately after the eclipse on the plane, he sketched what he saw. And you do see more at an altitude because you've gotten rid of a lot of the atmosphere. But when looking through the airplane windows, that decreases a bit, but this is basically what we saw. Now, this was in 1994 in Bolivia on the Altiplano. I called this one my devil's eclipse because what we saw, the extensions at the top and the one at the bottom, looked like the devil with horns and a beard. Whoops. 1995 was in Ganoli, India. This prominently displayed on the ground is Craig Small's lucky eclipse flag. That flag has been to every eclipse that Craig has been to and has never been clouded out. So we're not superstitious, but we make sure that we are where that flag is. And you go to India, you have to have an elephant ride. That's me and Glenn Schneider sitting next to me. I have a video, which I'm not showing, but we went up the mountain to the fort, and the road is a little wall, actually a fairly big wall, you can see it in the background, where there's a big drop off to the town below. And coming down the mountain, there was a guy on the ground there taking the elephant poop with a shovel and throwing it over the wall to the town below. This is us set up in India. India is a very interesting country. I would like to go back there again. I really liked it. There's only one problem that we had. In eclipse chasers is a camaraderie. And Craig was not part of this group, but was going to join us. And when he came onto the site, one of the participants complained that he paid all this money for this trip. Why were we allowing somebody from the outside to come on? And Glenn had prearranged for that to happen, but there's no accounting for people. This is in Siberia in 1997. As you can tell, it was Siberia. Nighttime temperatures were -40, daytime temperatures were about 10, that's Fahrenheit. And I was well prepared for the temperatures. You can see it's a North Face Arctic suit. Now, this is after the eclipse. This one has a little story, which I'll give part of it. We got up that morning and it was cloud horizon to horizon. We had an airplane on reserve there. This was in Chita, Siberia, which is just north of the Siberian-China-Mongolian border. In 1997, we were told that in modern-day Russia, they accept credit cards. Not out there. They wanted cash for the airplane that we had reserved. And while we were trying to get that airplane, we delayed a lot. We finally decided to take a bus to the chosen site. On the bus, I did something that I started to do with my very first eclipse. Sam had sat down with me prior to my first eclipse. Being Jewish, the old joke is that there's a blessing for everything. So we decided what the blessing for an eclipse is, and I've recited it at every eclipse. We were on the bus still, traveling to the site, and about 5 minutes before first contact, I got up, explained to everyone on the bus what I was about to do, recited the blessing, which in Hebrew is called a bracha, and about 2 minutes later, it was like the parting of the Red Sea. The clouds disappeared. Everybody got off that bus and was totally nuts in setting up their equipment. We saw the entire eclipse. We even saw Hail Bop, which is, I can't get my cursor, in the upper left-hand corner, that's Hail Bop during the eclipse. I think it's only the fourth time in history that a comet has been seen during totality. After the eclipse was over, after the fourth contact, the clouds rolled back in and that was it. You can take it any way you want, but that's what happened. And this was one of Glenn Schneider's photos of that eclipse. He was doing a stereogram to try to get a 3D image out of it. This was 1998 in the South Pacific on the HMS Veendam, Holland America's ship. This picture appeared in Sky and Telescope. I am somewhere in the middle to the right. If you look towards the bow, there's a woman standing there in a blue dress. That's my wife. And here I am with one of my cameras set up. I don't know where I got a Yale hat. Nobody went to Yale in my family. Somebody handed me the hat because my younger daughter was wearing my regular hat, and the wind blew it off into the water. So I didn't want to get a sunburn on my head because I am hair challenged. And during partial phases, I was using welding glasses, which were in vogue at the time. And by the way, that was my daughter wearing, in the lower left corner, my Asley hat with my eclipse pins on it. That's what blew overboard. Because she didn't have a hat, so I gave her mine, so she shouldn't get a sunburn. And after the eclipse, that's Craig Small's lucky eclipse flag flying from whatever they call the superstructure. And this is a small clip, small video clip. That's me behind the camera. That's my older daughter Eve. She was 19 at the time. This was actually, this was her first eclipse. And this is the beginning of totality. Watch her mouth. What happened? She was, I'm sorry, this was a second eclipse. She was on the ship in the Veendam in 1998. This was on the Black Sea in 99 on the Stella Solaris. And that was a still from that eclipse. Oh, how do I back up? I think I can do that. Nope, okay. This was 2002 in Australia. I missed the eclipse in 2001. I'm not going to go into the reason for it. This was in Australia, obviously. The kangaroo in the front was eyeing me. He was the alpha male. And I was slowly creeping up to get a picture until suddenly he took one of his paws and pounded on the ground, giving me a warning that was close enough, at which point I backed away. And this is the Outback, Glenn Schneider saying these were our camper vans. They're not vans, they're box trucks with a camper attachment on the back. And I'm not sure if you can see it in this thing, but there's a screen in front of the windshield because the kangaroos sit at the side of the road, and as you drive, they jump in front of the vehicle, and that's to prevent them from coming through the windshield. Unfortunately, one did that to me, went right under the truck, and I'm sad to say I killed a kangaroo in Australia, but evidently Australians don't care. They consider them pests. But this is what the Outback looks like, basically. And we went to a farm where the people were gracious and let us stay there in one of their buildings overnight. They had something like 900 acres that supported about 100 head of cattle. And we had chartered 2 airplanes just in case. This was plan B, to get above the clouds, if there were clouds. Turns out there were no clouds. So we took a little tour of the area after the eclipse. And here we're just looking at the maps of where we're going to fly. So I'm on the left. Glenn is in the middle. Craig is next to him. And that's one of the pilots. This was our eclipse site. Now we went to pretty close to the sunset point because we wanted to see the spectacular total eclipse at sunset. And we got all 23 seconds of totality. But it was very spectacular to see the eclipse sun very close to the horizon. And that's what it looked like. And one thing that we got by doing that, that was a wide-angle view. One of our compatriots who lives in Australia, we became very friendly. I've made friends all over the world in the eclipse chasing. His name is Joe Calley. After totality, what happened was, instead of the shadow going off into the distance, it lifted up and went straight up into the sky. So this is a shot looking straight up with a wide-angle lens. You're essentially looking up the umbra, up the conic umbra. This is a very rare sight to see. And now this was 2003. If you notice, they had to label our shirts so it wouldn't get lost with our names. This was going through security in the airport again in Australia, because this was a flight in the state of Victoria. And of course, you go to Australia, you get to see the local fauna. These are so cute. These were the participants in this particular flight. Let's see. Glenn is down, center on the floor. I'm in there somewhere. Yeah, I'm just to the left, two people of the Penguin. The chance of this flight was that one thing that you do in eclipse chasing and being in Umbraphilia is you want to go places where you might not be able to go otherwise. So Glenn, through extensive negotiations with Qantas, managed to book this flight. It seems that there's a Croydon Travels that arranges for tourist flights above in a 747 over Antarctica. So Glenn negotiated with them to have one of these tourist flights on that particular day. And to be able to afford a 747 for a long flight, the tourists sat on one side of the plane and we sat on the eclipse side of the plane. And there's Craig's flag, me, Glenn. The captain to the right is the chief pilot for Qantas at the time. He said he's taking that flight. And we are in the book of world records for the longest domestic flight, because we took off in Australia and we landed in Australia. It was 13 hours and 47 minutes, wheels up to wheels down. And that's what it looked like outside the plane window. And this was shot, this was Glenn's shot. He had the only good window on the plane because he was sitting in the cockpit. He was locked in the cockpit for the entire flight. He had to write almost like a proposal for funds to get into the cockpit, and they finally accepted it. And of course, afterwards, this is a tradition that was established by Craig and Glenn many years ago, that we toast each eclipse with chocolate egg creams. Those from New York will know what that is. And it has to be Fox's You Bet chocolate syrup, because any other chocolate syrup is illegal for a proper eclipse toast. So you see Craig is holding the bottle of Fox's You Bet. Okay, this was in Tahiti in 2005. This was an open air market where you could sit down and eat in the port. This was a cruise on the Paul Gauguin, which is a 320 passenger ship, small ship. The luxury cabin is reserved at all times for the granddaughter of Paul Gauguin. She wasn't on this trip, but it sat empty. It's never used for anyone else. Now, an interesting thing happened. We had a port of call at the island that the mutineers from the Bounty went to hide. And at the moment, the name of the island is blocking me. Anybody come up with it quickly? It's, anyway, normally people don't go onto the island. The islanders come out in the longboats. However, one of our group is an island visitor, and he went to the captain and convinced him. He says, we go to every island in the world. I have to get onto that island. And so the captain arranged it, but he said, you have to be physically fit because you're going to climb down a rope ladder into one of the longboats. Now, there were quite big swells pushing the longboat up and down. This is when it is at its apex in the swell. It went down about another 20 feet when it was at its trough. I know when I climbed down, it was all the way down. And they would try and get you to climb down when it either was at the apex or at the trough to try to minimize the motion of the boat. When Craig Small stood in the open hatchway where that man in the blue outfit is standing, he took one look at the boat coming down and he shook his head no. But he came back later and decided he had to do it, so he did it. And there we are in the boat, getting ready to go ashore. Pitcairn Island just came to me. That's what happens when you get older. And there I am. That's the anchor from the Bounty. There's a museum there with some relics left over. And the eclipse was viewed from the ship. And literally, contact 2 occurred just inside the edge of that cloud. And then a few seconds later, cleared the cloud, because we were under full speed ahead, racing toward that hole in the clouds. It was a very short eclipse, so we have chromosphere all the way around. Okay. The next eclipse was in Turkey in 2006. Glenn and I made MSNBC, a reporter was there. And the eclipse went up through northern Africa, Libya, across the Mediterranean, north through Turkey, and ended somewhere in northern Europe. The place to go, of course, was Libya, because it's in the desert, and the chances of clear skies are virtually 100%. But Muammar Gaddafi was still in power then. Glenn and I looked at each other for about a millisecond and said no. And so we went to Turkey, and we went to a hotel right on the Mediterranean shore. Oh, by the way, we toured Cappadocia, and these are the tunnels that the Cappadocians used to escape from the Romans. And this was the helipad at this hotel, right on the beach in the Mediterranean. You notice the clear skies that we had. They opened the hotel for us. This was in February or March, I believe, and it wasn't season yet, and the hotel was closed. But they opened the hotel for us, and they brought out drinks during totality. Well, we told them not during totality, but during the eclipse. The first time that ever happened, probably never happen again. And notice I'm patching my eye, became a pirate, again to dark adapt one eye. And this was our motley crew, with Craig's eclipse flag in the background, of course. And this was my picture from that eclipse. I finally was able to get cameras working properly on my eclipses. This is what we saw. Now, Glenn did the processing on the images. His aim was to make it appear like it appeared to our eyes, not the way some people do in terms of getting all the detail out of corona, because that's not what you see. This was 2000 and I forgot what year it is. Let's see, this was 2008. This was in Prague, because we did touring in Europe first. And anybody see the movie Monuments Men? Glenn and I were in Bruges, Belgium, and walking through the various churches looking at all the statues. And we came across this statue. I said, oh my God, this is so much better than anything else we've seen. And then we read the plaque. It was a Michelangelo. It's the only Michelangelo outside of Italy. Now, if anybody saw the movie Monuments Men, which is a true story, this was the statue that was rescued by the Monuments Men from Nazi Germany during World War II. When Glenn and I were there, you could walk right up to it. Now, after the movie came out, it has a big rope barrier around it so you can't get close to it. But it's absolutely gorgeous. It's amazing that someone can get something like this out of a piece of stone. If anybody has seen his other statues, they are unbelievable. I've seen all of them. My wife and I took a trip to Italy a few years ago with the aim of going to Florence. I wanted to track down and see all of his statues, and I did, and they're truly remarkable. So this was another airplane flight out of Germany, out of Dusseldorf, towards the North Pole. It was in the very North Atlantic. And I wanted to be able to watch out the window without having to hold the camera. So I devised this setup, which I'm practicing on a mirror in my house. There's my safe behind me, with a suction cup on the wall of the airplane and a suspension out of bungee cords with the binoculars attached to a mount on the video camera itself. I don't do stills out airplane windows. I don't consider it to be a stable platform. This was the airplanes. The LTU was the name of the airline then. And this was arranged, the airplane was arranged through Sky and Telescope. And the editor of Sky and Telescope is somewhere down there. At the moment, I can't find them. By the way, in all our, except for the flight over Antarctica, which the cockpit was locked, all our charters had open cockpits. There's Glenn sitting with his apparatus to photograph the eclipse in the cockpit. And here I am in the plane with my apparatus suspended as I had planned. If you'll notice, it appears that my window was blocked by the person leaning his seat back. Seats were put in the upright position for the eclipse itself, so that wasn't a problem. And this was Glenn's picture out the window, minus the marks on the screen. The next eclipse, 2009, was in China. You have to say that properly. Our previous president would say China. Okay, touring, we flew into Shanghai, and then we went to Beijing. And of course, you don't go to Beijing without seeing the Great Wall. And this is a significant angle that the wall is built on and over these hills. There I am with a few local tourists. And you can get an idea of the angle that wall goes up that hill from looking in back of me. Now, this was our eclipse viewing site in Wuhan. Let me back this up. In 2009 was when there was the SARS virus. And they were coming onto the airplanes when we landed in China and taking everybody's temperature. And if you had an elevated temperature, you were put in isolation. So before we landed, by now everybody took Tylenol to make sure our temperature was not elevated, because otherwise we'd miss the eclipse. And it turns out our flight was the very first flight in which they stopped taking everybody's temperature. However, this was our viewing site. If anybody knows what this site is, this is the infamous laboratory where they think the coronavirus escaped from in Wuhan. By coincidence, that's where we wound up, in their parking lot to observe the eclipse. There I is with my setup. This site became very crowded as the morning progressed with people. And again, you can see I've become a pirate again. And unfortunately, this was the only eclipse in which we had clouds for part of the totality, but it did clear to a certain extent, so we didn't miss it completely, and this was the only shot I got. Tahiti in 2010. This was literally walk down the road from the hotel, which was the International Hotel, and the skies were dark. I mean, this was a 24 millimeter lens. As you can see, that was just beginning to get the stars being smeared. So it was probably about a 15 to 20 second exposure, 800 ISO. So it was dark there. And Glenn Schneider replicated himself twice, positioned himself in three places under the Milky Way so I could take this picture. Now, this was another flight, because we viewed in the South Pacific. This was an interesting airplane that Glenn had obtained. This was an airplane that was in Australia. It was a charter company that would supply the bases in Antarctica with supplies. And this eclipse was during the austral summer, so the plane was sitting idle. So Glenn convinced them, to fly to Tahiti and do this flight. And they actually outfitted the plane in a certain way that made them get a new certificate of operation, because to change the balance of the plane. It took all the seats out on the eclipse side of the airplane for us. It was an A319. And this was my practice at home. I duplicated the size and angle of the window to see what position I had to be in to view. Turns out that worked out very well. Another interesting thing about this flight, these airplanes have 3 layers to the windows: an outer layer, an inner layer, and one in the middle. The one in the middle is very important for maintaining pressure in the airplane. So they actually can remove it without loss of pressure. And they did remove it for us for this flight, but they warned us not to touch the remaining middle layer, because any damage to that, we would lose cabin pressure. And that was that eclipse. Okay, this was 2012, again in Australia, Northern Australia. This is a crocodile. If you can see it in the water, they're camouflaged pretty well. Now, this eclipse presented a bunch of problems for me. I had taken off from my practice 2 weeks for the trip, which was what I usually did with my partner covering the practice. This was during Sandy. Hurricane Sandy occurred just before this. And my office was located on 36th Street, which was south of the 42nd Street line, where there was a blackout for a week because of Hurricane Sandy flooding Lower Manhattan. So now I was supposed to leave at the end of that week. Now I was faced with the prospect now of having my office closed for 3 weeks without me there, which wasn't going to work very well as far as my patients were concerned. So there was, and we had blackout in my house. We had no power for like 2 weeks. I left my wife without power in the house for this eclipse trip. So we found a place in the town of Roslyn that was open, a restaurant that had a generator. So everybody from the area was there with their cell phones plugged into the walls to charge them. And I was on the phone with American Airlines for 3 hours negotiating to get my flights changed so I could go see this eclipse. And I have never experienced my intestines in a knot with the pain before, but during those 3 hours, my tension was such that that's what I experienced. I finally negotiated, but my itinerary was not exactly what I liked, because I was supposed to fly from New York to LA, then LA to Australia in business class, and then a flight from there to Northern Australia, and one flight. Instead, they gave me New York to LA in cattle car class, as I call it, and the long 14-hour flight to Australia was also in cattle car class, and I had the window seat. And being of elevated age, for those who know, our bladder has a tendency to need to be used and emptied quite frequently. And the two people next to me were sleeping the whole way, and I had to climb across the armrests several times to go use the bathroom. But anyway, I did get there. I got there. I spent 3 days traveling, 2 days in Australia, and 2 days traveling back, because I was able to use my original itinerary to come back. And so all that was for 2 days in Australia, but I got to see the eclipse. Okay, why is this not working? Hang on a moment, I gotta go back into my, oops, my computer just froze. This is very rare, never happens to me.
Did you lose focus on your screen? You want to
Like the battery.
click on the,
No, it shouldn't be the battery. Pause share. That's not working.
Are you still in Zoom, or is the computer pointing to something else like the Finder?
It shouldn't be. Let me just
why
plug
don't
in.
you try closing the share and open it up again?
Yeah, my cursor is not working either for some reason. I'm trying to get to stop share.
Hit the escape key.
Yeah, I just got out of that.
Okay,
Oh,
slide
it
just
went-
changed.
okay, slide has changed. All right, so I should be okay now. So this was at the a viewing site in Northern Australia. This was a cow paddock full of cow manure, some of it very fresh. Needless to say, the shoes that I was wearing may still be in that cow paddock to this day, because when we got into the car, I took them off and tossed them out. But at the bottom, you can see Glenn's, what he called his lugoscope, which he used to image the eclipse. What he would do is he would take the mirror out of it, put that in his luggage, and he used this to pack clothes in, and it acted as his luggage. So Joe Calley is the man in the middle. He's the one that I befriended in Australia, who took that picture I showed you earlier. And that's what it looked like. You know, I told Glenn, I says, you know, the sun is going to be very close to the top of the trees. He says, don't worry about it. He figured it out, figured the angle and everything, the timing. He says it will just clear the trees. And it did. So that's Glenn on the ground. That's me looking through my binos. And that was a close-up. It was during solar maximum, so it's a very symmetrical corona. Now, 2013, Kenya. This eclipse was a very difficult eclipse, and I'm going to dwell on it a little bit because it actually is my favorite because of the way we saw it. But when you go to Kenya, you don't go to Kenya without doing a safari. So I have a couple of safari pictures here. Now, these animals weren't a long distance away. It's not through a telephoto lens. They were right there, outside the vehicle. They have no fear of you if you're in the vehicle. If you get out of the vehicle, you're lunch. And there's Jeffrey. And wildebeest and zebra, as the English say. Now, in capital of Kenya, there is the carnivore restaurant where they serve some of the local fauna. And you see Steve Kalani is pointing at crocodile and ostrich, which is what was on the menu that day, besides chicken and pork and beef and turkey and the regular stuff. Some people did partake, not me. It's not kosher. Now, this eclipse, Nairobi is at the bottom of this picture. The eclipse path went right over Lake Turkana, and the green area just to the east of the lake is one of their national parks. It has a landing strip there. So we had 2 airplanes chartered. I forgot the model of the Cessna that it is. It's the Grand Caravan that they use. If you look towards the rear of the fuselage, there's an opening, and it has a top and a bottom. Photographers use that to photograph like the wildebeest herds during migration from the air. So we chartered 2 of these, took half the seats out of each so we could distribute ourselves. We weighed ourselves and our equipment so we could put the maximum fuel on board, because this was also Plan B, to fly above the clouds. We could go as far as Uganda if we had to. We would have landed in Uganda to refuel. However, that day at site at Lake Turkana, and normally they get 1 airplane there a week. There were 25 airplanes there that day, and you can guess why. However, we had a sandstorm. This is what it looked like out the wing of the airplane, out of the window of the airplane. So we took Plan C, which wasn't planned in advance. Glenn Schneider started working on his Casio calculator watch, calculating furiously an intercept. And the straight lines at a slight angle is the eclipse path that was actually up path from where we were, because we had a thunderstorm coming in and we couldn't fly above a thunderstorm. So he's furiously calculating an eclipse intercept on the airplane as we're flying up the eclipse path ahead of the thunderstorm. And as we're flying, the clouds in front of us were going lower and lower and lower. So the path of the flight was from the right of your screen to the left of your screen. Then we looped around and started heading back towards the thunderstorm. And we're all getting nervous as the clouds are now coming up close to the plane. And all along this flight back, the captain kept leaning over to Glenn, who was in the co-pilot seat. Tell me when to turn, tell me when to turn, tell me when to turn. And when we reached the point where you see the line move across the eclipse path, Glenn was looking at his watch and said, "Now." We took a left-hand turn, and the little purple arrow dot, that was the position of the airplane as the Umbra overtook us coming from the left side. Looking out that, we all ran to the back and opened that window, and you can see the person who took this picture is a little bit further back, so his view is out through the glass. In the lower left-hand corner, those are my hands holding my iPhone, which is all I used to video this eclipse. Mainly I'm sitting further back because I don't want to be in near an open window in an airplane. But as you can see, the clouds right below us, the chromospheric light off in the distance, the regular daylight just past the Umbra, and the sun in total eclipse. We got all of 11 seconds of totality after all this. This was the victory grasped from the jaws of defeat. This was an absolutely amazing intercept on the fly. Glenn is an amazing person to do this. And that was one of the pictures that guy holding the camera to right of me took. The next eclipse was in 2015, again flying out of Dusseldorf, Germany. And we went to the Neanderthal Valley. There's a museum there where they show an exhibit of what Neanderthals were. And the modern research, Neanderthals weren't the cavemen that was always predicted. They were actually fairly intelligent. So they dressed one up for this picture. Can you tell which one is the Neanderthal? Joe kindly stood next to the statue. And I took this picture. Would you like a copy of the picture, Joe?
Sure. I'll add it to my collection.
And again, this was the same airline as the other German flight, which is LTU. They just changed the name to Air Berlin. And again, there's Craig's eclipse flag. And right in the middle, right at the corner where it says North Atlantic Total Solar Eclipse Flight, that's Beatty, the editor of Sky and Tell at the time. And I'm in there somewhere. And yeah, I'm standing. Glenn is right behind that picture, kneeling down, and I'm right behind Glenn, looking a little bit older. Now, I want you to take a quick look at this. Glenn's daughter Maya came along on this. I want you to take a quick look at this picture, especially at the bottom line. This was out of Dusseldorf, and the end of the flight was at a fictitious point. This was on the boarding pass. Now, there were a lot of flights in that area. This was near the Faroe Islands. The plane that we were on was the one that's labeled 1234, right in the middle. And Air Berlin has a second flight, and that was the one that's 1000, a little towards the left. All the other flights were other organizations that set up flights for the eclipse. If you notice at the bottom of the picture, there are two flights in a different direction. That was just the normal air traffic in the area at the time. Now, the air traffic control had set up a limit after all these people signed up for air rights. Said no more, there's too many planes in the airspace. At the top of the thing, you can see there are 3 plane images. They were stacked. That was the only way they could accommodate them, according to their flight plan, was to stack them at different altitudes. And that was this eclipse. That was the outside the window of the plane. This was Indonesia, 2016. Eastern Indonesia, a small island way out in the Indonesian archipelago. I must say, out of all the eclipses I've been to, the people in Indonesia were the most friendly I've encountered anywhere in the world, except Australia. Australia likes Americans. And if you notice the sign in the background, that's an eclipse sign. They were all well aware what was happening. And they all wanted to meet the American scientists coming to view the eclipse. And this is the island that we went to. The island we originally planned for was the upper island, the upper left-hand corner, called Ternate. If you look on the map, it's a very tiny island way in the east of Indonesia. It took a big flight to get there. But we took a practice run out of the little blue area on the tip of Ternate is where we chartered a small motorboat to travel. It took about 3 hours to go that distance all the way down to where the arrow was, which was our viewing site. We gained about 20 seconds totality doing it because we got close to the center line. But we didn't do it for that reason. We did it because the weather prospects looked a little bit iffy on Ternate, and they would look better from Tidore. So that's what we did. So we took a practice run the day before. On the day of the eclipse, we got up, went to the dock at 4 o'clock in the morning. So this boat ride was in total darkness. They know where they're going. So this was on the island of Ternate. No, sorry, Tidore. There's a small village there. The people were so happy. They all wanted to have their pictures taken with the American scientists that came to view the eclipse. That's me with my setup, which I will show you a little more detail in a few minutes and explain that, with some of the people who were gathered behind me to watch the eclipse. And I was sitting on the seawall there. And this is the people waving us goodbye when we left after the eclipse. They were sad to see us go. Oh, God. All right. Can I go backwards? Yes. Okay. This was my setup. We were just like a half a degree off of the equator, which means that to track, I had to have the tripod head at almost 90 degrees to the tripod. It wasn't going to balance. So I made a wooden platform that was braced to hold up the weight of the cameras. And that's an Astro track, which was going to do the tracking. And I had to get the angle correct because it was a half a degree off the equator. So I demonstrated to my older granddaughter why we learned trigonometry in high school. Because I measured the angle, I measured the distance from the fulcrum at the back of the support to a little bolt that I put in the front of the support. And I made a triangle on paper out of it, measured the angle, and that way measured using the sine of the angle, the distance I had to elevate the bolt to get the proper half degree offset from the equator. And it was, I forget how many turns it was, but it was a quarter 20 bolt, so it was 20 threads to the inch. So I was able to figure out exactly how many turns I needed to get the right number of threads up. And it worked perfectly. And that's the image that I took. And according to my older daughter Eve, she says she feels this is the best image I've ever taken of any eclipse. The next eclipse, 2017, the great eclipse that went across the United States. We were in Oregon, just outside of a town called Madras. Now, the entire town was jammed with people. This was a solar town campground that they set up for people. Notice our observing site is not anywhere near it. This place called Coark was part of an experimental agricultural area of an agricultural college in Oregon. Glenn, being a professor at the University of Arizona, knew how to contact people in other colleges, and he arranged for a group of us to be at their site. So we had about 100 people there due to their good graces. They were very, very nice about this. We gave them a nice donation afterwards. And this was my oldest granddaughter, Lily, who was 3 weeks shy of her 5th birthday at the time. And that's my picture from Indonesia. And it says she was the big sister because her brother was born just a year before. He was a year old. So this was her first eclipse. And technically it was George's first eclipse too, but he was just a year old. So he's out there. But it says, Grandpa and I will take my brother to eclipses. And I was told at the next eclipse that she was angry at me for not taking her. Because she really enjoyed it. A year before this eclipse, before her 4th birthday, I sat down with a globe and a little marble and a flashlight and explained to her what an eclipse is and the mechanics of it and all that. She is extremely bright. She was in day camp. She wore this t-shirt to day camp one day. The counselors asked about it, and she started explaining everything I taught her to the counselors, and their mouths like dropped to their belly buttons. Now, as I told you before every eclipse, I say the blessing. I'm in the middle there. This was all the people gathered around. And then the one holding my granddaughter, that's Eve, my older daughter. The one with the ponytail is the wife of my nephew, who's hidden there somewhere. Next to my granddaughter is my son-in-law, Evan. I noticed we're all wearing these white t-shirts that I had made up with one of my eclipse pictures on it. And in the very edge of the picture, the man with the white baseball cap is my brother. Let me explain about my brother. I would show my brother pictures of every eclipse I went to, and he would go, yeah, 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 yeah. They're all blah, blah, blah. Of course, eclipses don't do it justice. So I convinced him, since the United States, please come and see this. So he came to the eclipse. Okay, there I am saying, there's my brother on the left. Now, I was really loaded for bear on this one. Besides my Nikon with the camera, I had a professional, I'm talking about cinematography camera set up, which failed during totality. Mr. Murphy is always present during totality. So much so that the Nikon that I loaned Glenn for his logoscope for this eclipse worked perfectly in his practice runs and worked perfectly after the eclipse and failed to take a single shot during totality. And which, by the way, all our pictures are run by computer with software that's called Solar Eclipse Maestro. It connects directly to the cameras. You write a script ahead of time of all the exposures you want to take. You don't touch the camera during totality. It runs itself. So this was a wide-angle view that my son-in-law took with his iPhone. And this was my picture. Glenn had no pictures from this eclipse. He asked if he could use my photos. I said, absolutely. And then he processed them and got this out. This is what we saw, naked eye. Okay, and he also marked off the stars that were visible in the area. And a nice picture of the chromosphere with some prominences. This was my last eclipse, and I'll explain in a moment why I haven't attended one since then. This was 2019, back to Tahiti. We chartered a 787 Dreamliner from Latam Airlines, flew us from Chile, from Santiago, Chile, to Tahiti. This is on the tarmac in Tahiti. And so, you know, I look pretty tired because the flight started about 3 o'clock in the morning. Now, one thing I'm sorry, not Tahiti. You have to excuse me. My almost 75-year-old brain is playing tricks on me. Anyway, this is Easter Island, also more properly known these days as Rapa Nui. That's where the plane landed. Because our base of operations was to be Rapa Nui. We were going to take off from there and view the eclipse over the South Pacific from the airplane. And these things are truly impressive. The island is full of them, and they're large. You don't realize how big they are. And they really have no idea who the people were or when this was done. They have a lot of theories and conjectures, but no one knows for sure. The people who did these vanished without a trace. And this was in back of the motel we were staying in Rapa Nui. So you can see there was significant light there. And this was, again, a short exposure wide-angle lens of the southern Milky Way. That was Jupiter up at the top. Now, this eclipse, I was really loaded for beer. Okay, and getting a little bit older, I decided to adopt Glenn Schneider's practice of putting up a checklist to make sure I didn't forget anything, especially since we were all very tired from being awake during the night, flying there, and then going out on this. So I have all the steps of setting up my equipment and what to do. This camera, for those who know anything about cinematography, is a RED. And it's an 8K camera. And not only is it 8K, but it has extended exposure latitude up to 20 stops by getting into one of the menus. And it's expensive. And I bought it because I wanted to see if I can duplicate in video what you can do in stills. Because 20 stops of latitude is just about what the human eye can see. And remember, the idea says to duplicate what we can see, not to do these extended pictures that some people do. So, this is what was visible. Notice the very short extension of the corona. The reason is, if anybody's flown on a 787, first of all, the eclipse was up at something like 85 degrees altitude. And the reason we got a 787 was because the windows are canted in considerably, and by looking straight up and craning our necks, we would be able to see the eclipse out the top of the window. However, for anybody who's flown on a 787, they don't have pull-down shades. They have electrochromic window darkening. And the problem is that evidently the crystals in that coating screwed us in terms of seeing the corona. Nobody had any better pictures from the airplane than this. But amazingly, my camera worked the way it's supposed to work. It duplicated what we saw. But unfortunately, it's not what I hoped to capture. Okay, the next eclipse is this spring, April 8th. Where will you be? Okay, pick your spot, look at the weather prospects, make your reservations now. For anyone who's never seen a solar eclipse, the pictures you've seen is nothing. Okay, this is a phenomenon that only your brain can see and see everything happening around you, what the eclipse looks like. You will come away being bitten by the eclipse bug. And not all of you will go to every eclipse. Now, by the way, as soon as I was going to explain that the one at the beginning of the pandemic I missed because you couldn't travel anywhere. The next one a year later I missed. I was ready to go. I jumped through all the hoops necessary the airline required, but unfortunately my wife had fractured 3 vertebrae in her back and was flat on her back in bed, and I had to take care of her 24 hours a day, managing her pain medications. And at the same time, my brother was in hospice for his pancreatic cancer, so my head was not into going on to this eclipse, and I didn't go. And the last eclipse in Australia, last spring, I didn't go, also because my head still wasn't in it, but I'm definitely going to this one. So I have to give credit to 3 people. What got me into this was Joe Rayo came to ASLE in 1989 and gave a stupendous talk about the great eclipse that was coming up in 1991. And it got me excited. And I said to myself, I'm an amateur astronomer. Why haven't I gone to see an eclipse? And so I booked, and that got me started. So, Joe, you're responsible for all of this.
Thanks. Thank you, Joel.
Craig got me into the group that Tuthill had arranged from New Jersey, and that's got me started. And at the eclipse, I swore to him after that eclipse that I was never going to miss another one for the rest of my life. That's how it happened. And by the way, to give you an idea, my brother, who poo-pooed all the pictures and everything all those years, and I finally convinced him to come, at contact 3, which stands for totality, he opened his mouth and screamed, the loudest I've ever heard him scream, the word, wow. And after that said, when's the next one? So that's what'll happen to you. You'll get hooked. And then, of course, Glenn Schneider, who I have had the honor of traveling with on every single eclipse I've been to. He has become a really good friend. He told me a couple of years ago that he viewed me as the brother he never had, which makes me even sadder to relate to everybody that he is in the last throes of Lewy body dementia, which would be a great loss to the astronomical community and definitely to the eclipse chasing community. I thank you for your attention.